I invite the member for North Vancouver Seymour to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Tonight, some of us will attend at a vigil for missing and murdered Indigenous women. These women were mothers, sisters, daughters, cousins, and so important to their families and to their communities. We wear the moose hide or a red dress as our commitment to making the pathways followed by current and future generations of Indigenous girls and women safe. Everybody deserves to grow and flourish, not be obliterated or forgotten. Thank you.
Introductions by members. Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Today we honour the memory of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls and Two-Spirit people. And just a few minutes ago, the first Our Women Are Sacred walk has begun in my community of Esquimalt-Machosen at the corner of Admirals and Hallowell. To people in my community, I encourage you to join your neighbours, family and friends to heal, to celebrate and to hold each other up. I'm honoured to stand today in this House and raise my hands to the organisers. Surrounded by CEDA, Child and Family Services, in partnership with Songhees and Esquimalt Nations, Victoria Native Friendship Centre, South Island Indigenous Authority, Indigenous Perspectives Society, Hulitan Family and Community Services Society, Need to Our Child and Family Services Society, and Island Métis Family and Community Services Society.
Minister of Land and Water.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. None of us is able to do our jobs without the support and the teamwork of dedicated staff. And of course, for members of Cabinet, that includes the communications and public affairs professionals who support each minister's office. Today in the gallery, we are joined by 4 of these individuals from the team that supports my office in the Ministry of Land, Water and Resource Stewardship. And they are Tanya Venn, Communications Director, Nova Pearson, Communications Manager, Tom Winteroff, Senior Public Affairs Officer, and Chitra Arcot, Public Affairs Officer. I want to thank them for the work that they do and ask the House to please help me make them welcome today.
Member for Cariboo North.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. In our community of Quesnel, we have a monument that pays tribute, and we reflect, especially today, on the 28 missing and murdered women from our community. And I just want to acknowledge all of the families who have been impacted and all of the community organizations. There's a number of events that are happening over the next couple of weeks, and I just want to acknowledge everyone. So thank you.
Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I have 2 introductions. First, on behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Transportation, who I know will be coming in any minute, I want to recognize the young students that are here in the gallery today. They are here from Central Middle School, and they are the Students of Color Association. I reflect on my time in high school. I wish I had an association like this where I could get together with people to talk about our hopes and dreams and opportunities and challenges that we face. And I'm looking forward to seeing them at lunchtime to talk about any topic that they want to discuss. So I want to welcome them and I hope the House can please join me in welcoming them here today. Honourable Speaker, I do want to make one more recognition today. Most of us that are ice hockey fans will know that Hockeyville Canada competition, it's advertised quite broadly. There are 4 cities that have been chosen across the country as the final 4, and Princeton, BC is one of those communities. And I know my colleague from Fraser-Nicola and I are excited to hear they're the only city in the province that are in the Final Four. And Mayor Coyne, I know, is very excited. I saw a video he posted the other day promoting this important event. The winner of the competition gets not only some dollars for their rink, but also the ability to host a high-level hockey game in their community. And so I just want to share on behalf of Mayor Coyne with my colleague from Fraser-Nicola that people can go online and vote. I encourage all British Columbians to go online and vote starting tomorrow. The other Ontario and Quebec are our competition, so if we all unite, we can get this one through. And so the message is, let's bring this home, vote for Princeton in this important competition.
Member for Richmond-Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, May 5th, would have been my mother's 82nd birthday. She passed away from breast cancer a few years ago. Much of who I am is because of her. Happy birthday, Mom, wherever you are.
Member for Surrey Green Timbers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm also going to join the member from Delta North in welcoming the students from Central Middle School, Students of Color Association. Really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for taking out the time to meet with us, but really looking forward to our conversation. Would the House please make them feel very welcome?
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A 2016 article in the Prince George Citizen called Hilliard Clare a keepsake of Prince George, and that he was. Born in 1929, Hilliard moved to Prince George with his parents in 1930 to live in the Cache with other railroad families. Hilliard was a Mason and served in the Shriners. He was also an alderman of the city of Prince George, a JC senator, an associate member of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 43, and he was also known to play Santa Claus for the Elks organization. In his youth, Hilliard was a hockey goalie and a longtime director of the Prince George Mohawks Hockey Club. He received the prestigious Centennial Medal in 1967 for his community service and was Citizen of the Year in 1991. While Hilliard's dream was to go to law school, there was no money for continuing education at that time, so he went to work full-time at the iconic Northern Hardware store. And there he stayed for decades, more than 70 years, in fact. During his career, he drove the delivery truck, repaired bicycles, and eventually moved into the office. He said he enjoyed his job and all the people he worked with. Hilliard was an incredible part of the history of our community, and in particular, the Northern Hardware. Hilliard said that he had established many good and long-lasting friendships, and that the people of Prince George are friendly and helpful, and it was indeed a great place to live. Hilliard passed away on April 26, 2022. He will be deeply missed by his loving family and, of course, by our community. Hilliard Clare was a father and a grandfather and someone who was, in the words of writer Kathy Nadeline, a keepsake of the city of Prince George. We will miss you, Hilliard.
Member for North Coast.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. On International Day of the Midwife, I rise to celebrate and honour the midwives of British Columbia. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the International Confederation of Midwives, and the theme of this year's celebration is 100 years of progress. Midwives play a critical role in progressing our own healthcare system here in BC, and effectively provide primary maternity care to over 10,000 families across the province each year. Not only can midwives provide families the opportunity to access primary maternity care from the comfort of their own home, but they specialize in healthy and low-risk pregnancies, effectively reducing the pressure put on hospital resources. In British Columbia, we are fortunate enough to have over 400 highly trained midwives accredited through the PC College of Nurses and Midwives, who provide trauma-informed, culturally safe, inclusive, and effective services to families across the province. These incredible caregivers work diligently and sensitively to ensure the health and well-being of newborns and mothers before, during, and after delivery. This care gives strength and support to parents who experience the significant physical and mental challenges that come with bearing and delivering a child. Improvements are being made, but there continues to be a challenge of supporting midwives in rural and remote communities, where health services are often limited, and midwifery is in fact an ideal service. I've been working with local advocacy group Prince Rupert Advocates for Midwifery. This is a group meant to bring together people in the Prince Rupert community who would like to see midwifery as an option for maternity care. Whether a pregnant woman wants to have a hospital or home birth, a vaginal or planned cesarean birth, maternity care with a doctor or a midwife, it should be her choice. Currently in Prince Rupert, we don't have many of those choices, but collectively, along with local physicians and Northern Health, we're working on changing this. Today, I invite you all to join me in celebrating, appreciating, and honoring midwives. Thank you.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. Resilient, innovative, tenacious, courageous, strong, optimistic, excellence, service to community. These are words that have been repeated throughout the recent celebrations in Kelowna at the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce's Business Excellence Awards, the Southern Interior Construction Association Awards, the Okanagan Housing Awards of Excellence, and the City of Kelowna's Civic and Community Awards. Yes, April was a busy month, celebrating the businesses and community that makes Kelowna so exceptional. It was a joy to be able to participate, but mostly to be in person with so many from our city and reconnect after the pandemic. I wish that I could celebrate every single winner, but I will acknowledge as many as time allows. Know that you are all celebrated, and congratulations. For the Business Excellence Awards, Hub Office Furniture Inc., Festivals Kelowna, Crasian Foods Corp., Secure Right Mobile Storage, TKI Construction, Ecora, Courtney Koga, Habitat for Humanity Okanagan, Floramax Technologies, O'Rourke's Peak Sellers, Acres Enterprises Limited. For the 47th Annual Civic and Community Award, Edna Turbasket, Mike Sodaro, Kelowna Senior Secondary Owls Boys Volleyball Team, Melindy Elmore, Jerome Blake, Tatum Wade, Everett Shumland and Nathan Liu, Dryden Bennett, Jennifer Money, Canadian Mental Health Association, Kelowna, Toyota Kelowna, Don Dobson, Lloyd Nelson, David Withler, Okanagan Awards of Housing Excellence, and I'll just list the grands. Acorn Communities, Dilworth Homes, Edward West Luxury Homes, Norelco Cabinets, Hannah Katie Interior Design, Burkham Builders, and Gord Turner for a Lifetime Achievement Awards. And for Sika, Emil Anderson, Plan B Construction, John Batchelder Construction, Train Construction, Hool Interiors, Acres Enterprises, High Street Ventures, and Flynn Canada. Congratulations to all the winners, and thank you for all you do for our community and through your service. Thank you.
Member for Courtney Comox.
Honourable Speaker, growing from a safe home network 35 years ago, welcoming women and children fleeing violence into families' homes, the Comox Valley Transition Society today provides many vital services for our vulnerable neighbours and continues to cultivate a supportive community. From the thrift store to events like Coldest Night of the Year, where we're number 6 in the country for money raised. Thank you very much. In 1992, the Transition Society bought Lily House with 11 beds and 6 bedrooms. Today, Stacia Hasumi is the manager extraordinaire of this women's shelter. Last year, 111 women benefited from this safe haven, which is dozens less than before the pandemic. Finding housing for transitioning out of Lily House and for those who are stranded with no shelter, the Transition Society has gone on to operate 23 subsidized homes through provincial rent supplements, and they're planning for more housing. They opened Amethyst House, now operating 13 beds of social detox and supportive recovery for women. Praise goes to Tanya Edwards, who effectively collaborates with Island Health, Coastal Health, and CMHA to provide this valuable service. 40 modular units of second-stage housing are going up, ready in the next month. Recognizing that men who are supported result in women being safer, they operate a men's group to address violent behaviors. Applying a gendered lens, the Transition Society has taken on co-ed programs for the homeless, including sheltering and the Connect Day program managed by Diana Merton. Deb Prane provides remarkable advocacy as she manages 64 beds at the Travelodge, working collaboratively with health to provide supports as this transitional housing helps bring stability to people's lives. Heather Ney, the Executive Director, steers the ship and is proud of her team, and we are all proud of them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Columbia River Revelstoke.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm so proud to stand here today to recognize a community in Columbia River Revelstoke for being the declared winner of the CBC search for the best town, small town in British Columbia. To begin, I want to acknowledge Revelstoke, Invermere, and Golden communities also in my riding that were in the hunt as well. In March, the CBC search launched its 7-week competition, garnered participation from 128 communities with a little over 850,000 votes. And the final vote took place on Monday, April 25th, and I'm proud to say that Kimberley was crowned the best town in BC. In the words of Mayor Don McCormick, and I quote, "This recognition of Kimberley couldn't come at a better time." This past winter was hard, not only due to the pandemic, but also they experienced 2 significant arson events, one at the Gymnastics Centre and another that took out the main ski lift for the entire season. This contest became a rallying point for the community, and it's not only great for Kimberley, it's great for the Kootenays. End of quote. Kimberley's known for many things. It's the highest city in terms of elevation in Canada, and more than 300 days of sunshine. It's known for its outstanding facilities, venues, and small businesses that range from incredible restaurants, the Underground Railway, the Kimberley Heritage Museum, the Communical Gardens, the solar park that powers 200 homes in Kimberley, of course the MLA's office, which is net zero as well, Kimberley Ski Resort and the Kimberley Nature Park, to mention a few. And then, Mr. Speaker, there is the people. There's a distinct vibe about this amazing place, this amazing community around the locals who are fun-loving, hard-working, and passionately committed to their community. They love where they live and would love to show you around. The people of Kimberley make it a place that is hard to leave and even harder to forget. Thank you to the CBC and congratulations to all the amazing small communities who participated. And I'm so proud of Kimberley that believes it's not only a great place to live, but now it's the best place to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Nanaimo North Cowichan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, our government has invested $27 million into more than 60 projects aimed at restoring and preserving watersheds and wetlands, including 2 projects in the Cowichan Valley. Cowichan tribes have received $2.8 million to lead 2 projects, which are also supporting 53 jobs in our community. The first project includes extensive work to rehabilitate the Cowichan and Coxsila rivers by focusing on sediment management and habitat rehabilitation. Work involves removing 90,000 cubic meters of sediment across 6 sites, repairing the hatchery and old south side dikes, excavating and reactivating side channels, and monitoring of sites for flood and drought management. The second is funding to help build a water sustainability plan for the Coxsila-Stolo, the Coxsila River watershed. In recent years, summer flow rates have been exceptionally low at times when demand is at its highest. This funding will be used to conduct technical work and analysis to support sustainable long-term land and water management in order to restore water flows for fish and water users. With Budget 2022, we are continuing to build on the success from projects like the ones led by Cowichan tribes, with an additional $30 million investment for restoration and preservation of more wetlands and watersheds throughout BC. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to use the remaining moments of my time to remember and honour the Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls from the Hul'qumi'num-speaking territories, of which I represent, the lost to the Cowichan, Lake Cowichan, Halalt, Penelakut, Liaxin, Sunimis, and Sunemu people. And may their memories be a blessing. Thank you.
Recognizing the Minister for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation for a ministerial statement.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw the House's attention to an important event in our calendar. Today, May 5th, is Red Dress Day in Canada. This is a national day of awareness to remember and honor murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people and their families. You may have noticed, Mr. Speaker, red dresses and ribbons pop up across this province in windows and trees and balconies. You may have also noticed the red dress hanging from the inner balcony of this House. The red dress is a symbol for the movement and is linked to a 2010 art installation by Jamie Black called the Red Dress Project. Ms. Black chose the color red after speaking with an Indigenous friend who told her that red is the only color that spirits can see. It is a way of calling the spirits of missing and murdered women and girls back to their loved ones. The project has sparked a grassroots movement that has now grown to unify us all in the fight against gendered violence. Each year, individuals across the country wear red. They post videos and photos of red dresses. They hang red dresses in locations across this country. Scott Fraser, my predecessor, started the symbolic hanging of the red dresses here, and today our legislature has been lit up in red in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Marches, gatherings, ceremonies, webinars, they raise awareness of this tragedy, Mr. Speaker, and they demand continued action. This includes the Our Women Are Sacred walk that's hosted by the Songhees Nation and is happening in Esquimalt as I speak. Red Dress Day continues the important work of honoring lost loved ones and the lives of all women and gender-diverse people. Together, we can support healing and we can end gendered-based violence. So let's take this opportunity to recognize the family members, the Indigenous community members, and concerned citizens across this country. They are demanding change, they are demanding safety, and they are supporting the healing so desperately needed from the scourge of this systemic violence.
Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here today with all colleagues in this House in a good and humble way to acknowledge the National Day of Awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Across Canada and here in British Columbia, Indigenous women and girls experience an extreme amount of violence and systemic racism. As the Minister just referred to, in 2010, Winnipeg artist Jamie Black began hanging empty red dresses, one for every missing and murdered Indigenous woman who has experienced racialization and sexualized violence. 12 years later, we continue this tradition to symbolize the Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people who never came home. BC has the highest number of cases of murdered or missing Indigenous women in Canada, particularly in the downtown East Side community and the Highway of Tears. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we all have a responsibility to use our voices to bring forward meaningful systemic change, provide resources to communities to end the cycles of trauma and violence, create healing, and bring justice to their families. We have a duty to educate ourselves on the dark history of our country, the appalling acts committed in residential schools, the 60s scoop, the millennial scoop, and the continued intergenerational trauma experienced by Indigenous communities today. Over 2,000 people, the families and survivors, as well as knowledge keepers, have shared their stories with the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. 3 years after its conclusion, families are still experiencing heartbreaking loss and are waiting for meaningful action. There are concrete actions that we can take towards protecting our women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, and we expect this government to do so. Our mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, aunties, and cousins are all so precious to us. And now is the time to ensure all Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people are treated with dignity and respect. I also wish to acknowledge the work of the countless advocates and organizations who have raised our consciousness on these issues. I hope that we have the wisdom and the humility to listen to those same voices as we move forward with solutions. We raise our hands to you all. OCM, hi, Megwitch. Thank you.
Member for Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the Minister of Indigenous Relations, to the member from Vancouver-Langara for your thoughtful comments on today. Today is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, Red Dress Day. I wish I could stand here, Mr. Speaker, and read into the record all the names of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, to SLGBTQIA+ peoples. To the matriarchs, the future matriarchs, to my grandmother, mother, aunties, sisters, cousins, nieces, to my daughter Ella. I love you and I raise my hands to you for your power and your strength. It's Mother's Day weekend. This weekend there will be too many members of our families who will not be with us. There are going to be too many empty seats around the table. Too many candles burning solemnly on the mantle. I wish I could say to our relatives that their Crown governments have been inspired to ensure that every case is investigated and solved. That this institution is sparing no resources to find the perpetrators of these crimes and bring them to justice. I can't. We can't. When I hear that the transformation of policing services is too expensive or too difficult, that governments don't like expensive or difficult, it comes from a more privileged reality than that of the families of the missing and murdered. As we become more comfortable acknowledging our inadequate and fragmented police services, built on institutionalized racism, stigma, and discrimination, where there is a distinctly lesser value placed on the life of Indigenous women, where we hear that Indigenous women and communities are both underserved by police and overrepresented in our justice system, transformation is not only necessary, but there is no other choice than to change this culture. I read the headline this morning, shocking and shameful. For the first time, Indigenous women make up half the female population in Canada's federal prisons. Let's put that into context. 1 out of every 20 women in Canada are Indigenous. When I sat on that Police Act committee, I held close to in my heart the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2 LGBTQIA+ peoples who died because our police services and structures and institutions made them vulnerable to exploitation and death. We must do better than we have. We must do better than the National Action Plan, much better than our meager commitment in Path Forward priorities and early strategies for BC. Today, we must do better than perform for those who are missing or murdered. And I hope that just as we paused for a moment of silence on the day of mourning for injured and killed workers, that we do the same for our sisters.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Member for West Vancouver Capilano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, we learned a woman was randomly attacked in James Bay, almost directly behind this legislature, when a man pushed her into the corner of a building face first, cutting her face and giving her head injuries. Now, despite denials by the Attorney General, random assaults in our communities have increased dramatically. When will the Attorney General end his catch and release and get prolific offenders off of our streets?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. My sincere sympathy and empathy to the victim of this horrible random assault. I imagine she and her family are going through quite a difficult time, and the broader community and the feelings of safety and security. The Minister for Public Safety and I take this issue very seriously, despite what the member suggested in her question. It's not correct. We take it very seriously. I've been on my feet saying that for a couple of weeks now. I look forward to making an announcement this afternoon with the Minister for Public Safety and mayors of our province about how we're going to wrap our hands around this issue and address it, because that's what our government does. When we see a problem, we move to solve it.
Member for West Vancouver Capilano, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nobody has confidence in this attorney in whatever he will announce, given his terrible track record for 5 years and his past statements. In 2011, he said, quote, "We have serious concerns with the results of the prolific offender program and are continuing to investigate aggressive policing tactics," end quote. So will the Attorney General end his catch and release system and take action to protect British Columbians so they can feel safe in their communities?
Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Honourable Chair. I think the police themselves will tell you when it comes to issues of mental health and addiction, and wherever those issues overlap with behaviours that are criminal in nature, that police need more than just the criminal justice system. We need mental health and addiction supports, and for some people, those need to be compulsory because they will not take up the voluntary supports we offer. And so police have been, we've been meeting with them, we've been going over these issues with, in relation to random stranger attacks as well as prolific property crime. The member says in her question that she doesn't appreciate my track record on these issues. I'll point out two similar issues that came to my attention. One was the financial crisis at ICBC. We now have the best insurance rates and the best benefits in Canada following my work, carried on by the Minister for Public Safety. The second, we had widespread and rampant money laundering in our casinos. Took on that issue. We no longer have that problem. So just like that, Honourable Speaker, we've identified this issue, we'll address this issue, and I assure members of the public who have been victims of crime, we take this very seriously.
Member for Kamloops, North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this government's empty rhetoric and lack of results is failing British Columbians on a wide range of issues, whether it's the catch and release system of this Attorney General and spiking crime rates, the crumbling of our healthcare system in front of our very eyes, or the lack of any measures around affordability. This government is failing by every measure. Gas prices are expected to hit an all-time high of $2.17 per litre tomorrow. This means it's going to cost some families upwards of $200 just to fill up their family vehicle. It's been 215 weeks since the Premier first promised action if gas prices stayed high. But today, life is more unaffordable with sky-high gas prices and soaring inflation and no help in sight. How much longer will families have to wait for a real long-term solution and relief on gas prices from this government?
Minister of Energy and Mines.
think everyone recognizes that the war in Ukraine has dramatically shifted energy markets, not only here in British Columbia, not only in Canada, but around the world. As a provincial jurisdiction, we do not control the world price of oil. So we have, but here within British Columbia, we do have a jurisdiction that's exercised through the BC Utilities Commission. That's why we created the Fuel Price Transparency Act, empowered the energy watchdog to investigate fuel prices here. In addition, thanks to the work of the Attorney General while he was responsible for ICBC, we are now going to be able to rebate to drivers the sum of $110 per person. That is beginning this week through the process of rebates by either mail, by credit card, or by check. So there is some relief on its way.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, this minister and her cabinet has got their retroactive pay likely in their bank accounts long before people's going to see any relief from this government when it comes to gas prices. The war in Ukraine is impacting everybody. Yet in Washington State, right across the border, gas is $1.50 a litre today, Canadian. In Alberta, it's 40 to 50 to 60 cents a litre, depending on the day, cheaper than in British Columbia. We have the highest gas prices with the highest gas taxes in North America. Despite 5 years of empty NDP rhetoric, BC continues to have that. 2 weeks ago, the Premier said he directed the Finance Minister to, and I quote, bring forward initiatives to assist with inflation. We'll see how that goes. So 215 weeks ago, the Premier said he had a plan for high gas prices. 2 weeks ago, he said he was still working on inflation. When are we going to see any type of discernible action from this government to help people with their inflationary costs at the pump?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate Kevin Falcon on his victory in the by-election. And no doubt he will be here very soon in the Legislature to and he'll have an opportunity to explain this statement that he made back in 2008. I don't want to pretend that there's any magic solution to the fact that fuel prices have doubled in the past 12 months. He was asked about this statement just recently on the Michael Smith Show, and he said, this is what I said, and it's true. So we'll await his solutions perhaps next week.
Shall we continue? Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, also known as Red Dress Day. And earlier this week, this Assembly has celebrated a new anti-racism data collection initiative, a new bill. Yesterday afternoon, I celebrated that initiative, and I wish that this BC NDP government's commitment extended, Mr. Speaker, to environmental racism. In northern BC, spurred on by this government's record-setting investment and subsidization of the liquefied gas industry, fracking is widespread. We're learning about the tragic and deadly consequences of fracking. We're learning more and more about it every day. Emissions of chemicals that cause and exacerbate birth defects, rare cancers, and asthma. These are disproportionately impacting Indigenous communities, Mr. Speaker. One study from the U.S. found that children born near fracking sites were 25% more likely to be born at low birth weights, or less than 5.5 pounds. They found an increased risk of childhood mortality and poorer educational outcomes. A lead author from the Nobel Peace Prize winning group called Physicians for Social Responsibility called fracking, quote, the worst thing I've ever seen. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Premier, does he care that his government is actively engaged in environmental racism against Indigenous communities, particularly Indigenous children and pregnant people.
Minister of Reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Saanich North and the Islands for the question. In the northeast of British Columbia, where the fracking activity to which he refers primarily occurs, we are engaged in addressing a decision, an historic decision of the BC Supreme Court, namely the Yahé decision. We are doing so with all the Treaty 8 nations who the judge concluded had had their treaty rights, their Treaty 8 rights violated through oil and gas activity. We are engaged in a series of initiatives to heal the land and to do some of the things that the members suggest need to be done. We are doing that in close collaboration and negotiation, not with the victor in that litigation, namely the Blueberry River First Nation, but all the other Treaty 8 nations. We are consulting widely with industry, and we are working with local governments to make sure we get it right.
Member for Saanich North and Island, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing ethical about LNG development. Neither the government nor the official opposition grasp that, Mr. Speaker. Not only is LNG Canada the single largest point source of emissions in this province, going to be, undermining any efforts that this government is making to combat the climate crisis, it's disproportionately impacting Indigenous people. It's environmental racism, Mr. Speaker. Researchers at the University of Toronto are undertaking further study of the direct impacts of fracking on fetal health, and more research is needed. But instead of contributing to that, the BC Oil and Gas Commission just criticized the existing study. Nobody seems to care about the fact that this study of pregnant people found higher contaminant levels in homes near fracking sites, and that the highest levels of exposure were found among Indigenous pregnant people who participated. Indigenous participants' homes showed notably higher concentration of chloroform, acetone, and decanol. There were higher levels of trihalomethane in their tap water, Mr. Speaker. My question again is to the Premier. How does the Premier reconcile his commitments to Indigenous people while ramping up this fracked gas development that is clearly putting the lives of Indigenous children and pregnant people at risk?
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is true that there has been a disproportionate impact on Indigenous peoples in the Northeast, and that, of course, was the conclusion of Madam Justice Burke in the Yahé decision to which I previously referred. And that is why, because of that treaty being violated over 100 years or more, we are rolling up our sleeves and doing what the court asked that we do. And in doing so, we will address the impacts that the member refers to. These impacts are real. We are not shying away from that. And indeed, we're taking the kind of steps in partnership with industry, in partnership with local government, to make sure that we have a viable Northeast economy, but that the balance is restruck in a way that works for everyone, those of us who benefit from that activity in the South, but particularly to address the impacts on those who suffer in the Northeast from those consequences. It's not going to be a simple solution, Mr. Speaker, but it's an overdue one, and we're rolling up our sleeves and doing that hard work now.
Member for Cariboo-Chilcotin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our healthcare system is in crisis, and despite NDP gag orders, doctors and nurses who are so committed to their patients are speaking out. In my community, a very respected surgeon who's practiced for 28 years at Cariboo Memorial Hospital has resigned. Dr. Dan Brosick says, and I quote, "There's a constant push to cancel or delay surgeries without consideration of patient care or needs. Patient care has been continuously eroded to the point where I can no longer participate in good conscience," end quote. Mr. Speaker, this morning I've been told that there's at least one more doctor who will be resigning. Will the Minister of Health act now to stop the crisis at Cariboo Memorial Hospital?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. With respect to surgeries in British Columbia, the member will know that I gave a comprehensive report yesterday on surgery in the province. He will know, and this has been disruptive everywhere in the province. The COVID-19 pandemic led to the cancellations of surgeries in Interior Health in March of 2020, and again significantly in 2021. These were decisions reluctantly taken because of the circumstances of COVID-19. Notwithstanding that, because of the outstanding work of doctors everywhere in BC, we set a record year for surgeries in British Columbia last year, reflecting the commitment of our surgical renewal plan, the commitment of that plan to patients in BC. A record number than ever before, 84 measures to increase surgeries, and working with doctors and surgeons everywhere in BC. We are always concerned when doctors express concern about issues in the system. Our commitment to Caribou Memorial Hospital and the standard of care there could not be higher. That's why we engaged in 2018 in a major capital rebuild of the hospital, ensuring our long-term commitment to the people of Williams Lake and region, and why we'll continue to work with healthcare professionals everywhere to ensure the quality of the system, even in these very challenging times.
Supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Concern and action are two different things. And what the residents of Caribou-Chilcotin need is action, and they need it right now. This is... The minister can try to dismiss what is happening in our healthcare system, but as I said, our residents are concerned. Honestly, they're afraid. I've heard from multiple doctors and nurses at the hospital that they are subject every day to a toxic workplace with harassment, bullying, and worker intimidation. They are gravely concerned about a declining patient care, but they're afraid to speak out. And I quote, due to fears of vengeful behavior, retaliation, persecution for coming forward, end quote. Just this morning, 3 more staff have reached out to me and contacted me with respect to concerns for patient care that is diminishing. Will the minister end his gag order on concerned healthcare workers, listen to them, and act now to stop a collapse at Caribou Memorial Hospital?
Minister of Health.
Honourable Speaker, I appreciate that in this legislature there is the use of rhetoric. I appreciate that. But, Honourable Speaker, I appreciate that, and it's used on all sides. But, Honourable Speaker, I think there's a certain duty to accuracy. Honourable Speaker, last week, the member for Abbotsford, other members of this House, referred to an Interior Health document that they said was evidence of what the member talked about. That document, and they quoted extensively from that document. In fact, the document in question, Honourable Speaker, dates to March 2004. March 2004. I know that members are honourable, and that would have been an unintentional misleading of the situation. But it's a serious situation. It's been a code of conduct that's been in place since 2004. There's whistleblower policies in the Interior Health Authority and everyone else to protect people to ensure fair access to the public to information. This House passed in 2019 the Public Interest Disclosure Act. That applies to public servants. It will apply and take over from those policies in the coming year, Honourable Speaker. The importance of whistleblower protection is fundamental. It's something that has been supported by all members in this House, Honourable Speaker. So when they cite evidence from 2004, when they cite evidence from 2004 suggesting that, when they ought to know where those documents came from. Ministers of Health in 2004 were the Honourable Colin Hanson, the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Speaker. When they use that as evidence, that is simply misleading and not appropriate to the debate. Our health care workers have been through everything in the last 2 years. They deserve a serious debate. They deserve our support. They have it on this side. They have it, I think, all over the House, and that should be demonstrated every single day.
Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, with all due respect to the Minister of Health, it's 2022, and our healthcare system, hospital after hospital after hospital, is in near collapse. due to the challenges that are taking place within those hospitals. And the members of the opposition are simply bringing forward the stories, the testaments of frontline healthcare workers who are demanding action. They're demanding that this minister actually step up and take action to improve the dire situation in our hospitals. And I will highlight another hospital, the one in Kamloops, Royal Inland, where the situation is dire. And nurses are speaking out in record numbers, despite the concerns that they have about potentially being dismissed or having other types of actions taken against them. One nurse had this to say the other day, and I quote, "What little staff we have is redeployed throughout the building, and medical units, which should have 8 nurses, very often have shifts where no nurses are booked to work," end quote. And Mr. Speaker, this is against the backdrop of reports that the nursing complement right now at Royal Inland Hospitals on most days is often at 50% of what a normal complement would be. That is unacceptable. So again, the question to the minister would be this: will the minister let these nurses speak, and will he fix the crisis at Royal Inland Hospital?
Minister of Health.
Well, the member may think asserting that a policy has been placed in 2004 was put in place by this government is just par for the course in his conduct of his role as an MLA, but I don't agree with it. The policy is the same. There's whistleblower protection and policies in place in the Interior Health Authority and everywhere else. They continue to be in place. In addition, this House, in the wake, frankly, of the health firings matter, which I will not go into here, put in place public interest disclosure legislation and unanimously passed it in 2019, which will also be in place in health authorities, Honourable Speaker. The members refer, and the members referred, and the member for Williams Lake, Caribou South referred to the record around surgeries. Well, we've added net new 299 net new nurses, surgical nurses, since we put in place the surgical renewal plan in May of 2020. That's action. The 84 measures to expand services, that's action. The best year in the history of British Columbia in terms of surgeries in one of the most complicated and difficult health years, that's action. The fact that more than 200 nurses have been hired at Royal Inland Hospital since January of 2021 is action. The fact that we have a dedicated staff of recruitment at that hospital is action. Look, I have visited Royal Inland Hospital. I have met with nurses. They have gone through the ringer and more over the last 2 years. I respect the work they do. They've communicated directly to me, and I've listened directly to them, their concerns, and we're going to continue to take action to support them because they deserve it. Our public health care system has done a remarkable job in dealing with this extraordinary period in the history of healthcare and the history of our province, and we'll continue to support our healthcare workers as we move forward through this year, 2022.
Opposition House Leader, supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what nurses are saying at Royal Inland, what they're saying at Caribou Memorial, what they're saying at hospitals all across this province is that these hospitals are on the verge of collapse. That's what's happening today. The reality is these nurses are coming forward in record numbers, and they are saying that, but they are worried about action being taken against them. Now, back to Royal Inland Hospital for a moment. Leaked data shows that there are up to 30 nursing shifts unfilled on any given day in the ICU and ER departments, on any given day. But instead of getting the needed support, nurses face discipline, up to and including a dismissal for violating the NDP's gag order. This is what BC Nurses Union President Aman Grewal has confirmed and with respect to this discipline, and I quote, "All that they're doing is advocating on behalf of their patients, letting the public know the reality of what public health care is like right now," end quote. So again, Will the minister drop the gag order? Will he act to end the healthcare crisis at Royal Inland Hospital so that patients and healthcare workers can go in and know that safety is not being compromised?
Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. And the member has done it again. And really, I think, you know, I won't characterize what he's doing. But when he refers to an NDP gag order, and they quoted from a document from March 2004, a policy, a code of conduct that has been placed since that time in health authorities that have whistleblower protection, for a government brought in the Public Interest Disclosure Act to protect whistleblowers, and that we protect them everywhere, from a Minister of Health who did raise issues around health employees in the Ministry of Health for years, yes, and brought in changes to ensure things were better. You bet, Honourable Speaker. And as well, there are significant issues facing healthcare professionals and healthcare workers everywhere. And I expect to hear from them when there are issues. They actually have a duty to report issues, and they do, Honourable Speaker. And I would say, Honourable Speaker, that the efforts and the work done by everyone to support healthcare workers in primary care, in long-term care, in acute care, to ensure our long-term care homes, 88% of them are not below standard in terms of staffing, which was a situation that existed when I became Minister of Health, changes, is my responsibility, and you bet I'll exercise it.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the minister can get up and say what he wants, but by every single measure, British Columbia is in a healthcare crisis. One in 5 British Columbians can't get a family doctor. They are being forced to rely on emergency rooms and walk-in clinics. Wait times are the worst in Canada in those clinics. And on top of that, we have healthcare workers that are frustrated, they are angry, and they are burned out. And what does the minister say? He gets up and regularly, all is well, and points British Columbians to an urgent and primary care centre. Well, you can imagine our shock when we received a leaked internal document, Urgent and Primary Care Centre Dashboard. And that dashboard laid out just how ineffective those clinics are. In urgent and primary care centres across the province, according to the leaked document, the average number of patients per practitioner per day is 4.6. That's right, 5 patients a day or less. So it's time for the minister to end the empty rhetoric, get up in this House, acknowledge that British Columbia and its healthcare system is in a crisis, and do something about it.
Minister of Health.
Honourable Speaker, British Columbia has been in a public health emergency with respect to the overdose crisis since 2016. British Columbia has been in a public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 since March of 2020. You bet I've been reporting every day, virtually every day, on the challenges facing that system, which are exceptional. We talk about primary care, happy to talk about primary care. In the year 2018-19, on the fee-for-service side, there was about 17.8 million fee-for-service visits. Most recent year, there were 19.5 million, right? The year ending March 31st, 2022. But what happened, of course, in the meantime, was the most radical, the most revolutionary set of changes to the system that had ever taken place. Because of those visits in 2018-19, 97% of them were in-person visits. And when the COVID-19 pandemic was proclaimed, substantive and fundamental changes were required to deal with that. So a very significant number of those visits, in fact, we went from about 600,000 virtual visits in the first year, in the previous year, in the pre-pandemic year, to 13 million in order to provide primary care, to stabilize the primary care system in what was a public health emergency. That occurred to ensure an increase in the number of visits and to ensure people got primary care in the best way they possibly could in a public health emergency. That's what occurred. Now, in the 2021-22 fiscal year, that went from 7 to 5 million. I want to assure the opposition, I'm going to sit down so the member will have her supplementary. That number moved, the in-person visit moved back from 5 to 7 million. It'll be moving back this year. This is the most fundamental change the system has ever seen, and our primary care teams did an exceptional job of dealing with it.
Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, again, you know, the minister can stand up and let's talk about the here and now. Let's talk about British Columbians who are desperate for a family doctor in this province. Let's talk about healthcare workers who are afraid to speak up and talk about the situation in their particular hospitals. And let's talk about the dashboard. Let me read to the minister exactly what the dashboard says. And for his benefit, I want to be clear, this is a here and now document leaked to the opposition. And here's what it says. Patients per day per practitioner, 4.6. That is a shocking number. And the minister knows that what's even worse is British Columbians are telling him and this government on a daily basis that the system isn't working. They can't get in. It's no wonder that the Esquimalt and North Quadra urgent and primary care centres were both at capacity by 8:30 this morning. Family doctors see up to 40 patients a day. But the data in the leaked dashboard shows 3 patients per day in Fraser Health, 3.1 at the Surrey Newton Clinic, and 0.9 patients per day at the Abbotsford Clinic. It is absolutely no wonder that we have a crisis in confidence in the healthcare system in British Columbia. That is on this minister and this government's watch. Will he stand up today and acknowledge the challenges that healthcare workers and patients and British Columbians are facing, admit that it is a crisis, and do something about it?
Minister of Health.
Honourable Speaker, I would say that this is something, I think I said it in my first answer, that I've said every day. We're in 2 public health emergencies, and they have a significant impact on every healthcare worker in our system. On the issue of primary care, as the member knows, because I just told her this, and the data is readily available, we went from about 17.9 million inpatient visits in 2018-19 to between 5 and 5.5 million visits in 2020-21 as a result of the pandemic. That meant that a lot of people, the majority of people who would typically visit family practice doctors did so virtually in what I think was an extraordinary and a change that happened in a matter of a couple of weeks, Honourable Speaker. Billing codes were put in place to protect the family practice system and ensure people continued to have access to care through virtual care. In addition, Honourable Speaker, the 27 urgent and primary care centres, the 53 primary care networks, the new community health centres, the primary care networks have 27 new funded employees in Prince George. The Prince George one alone, Honourable Speaker, are doing their work to contribute to the implementation of team-based care, a necessary prerequisite. In addition, we're taking steps to give particularly doctors other options and dramatically expanding, doubling the number of nurse practitioners. Honourable Speaker, the member may feel that the million visits to urgent and primary care centres at a time when in-person visits were at a premium was not the right approach. I think for those million people, it was a pretty good result.
The bell ends the question period. Honourable members, I would like us to observe a moment of silence to remember all lost sisters and Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous men. Please, let's do that. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call continued second reading debate Bill 10, Labour Relations Code Amendment Act. And in Section A, the Douglas Fir Room, I call continued estimates debate for the Ministry of Education, the childcare.
All right, members, I acknowledge the Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Speaker. I'm really delighted this morning to be able to take my place in the chamber to make some remarks about Bill 10. And one of the things that I have learned in my time in this place, that the title of the bill may not necessarily address the seriousness of what is contained in it. In fact, this bill, Bill 10, is entitled the Labour Relations Code Amendment Act 2022. So the average British Columbian, or even perhaps the average legislator, may look at that and think, well, it's just a minor bill. We're having an amendment to the Labour Relations Code. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth in the case of this bill. And I know that many speakers, particularly opposition members, have spoken to the bill, and my comments will obviously echo some of the concerns that have been outlined. I do, however, want to build a little bit on the Leader of the Green Party's comments that she delivered yesterday, because one of the reasons this bill is in front of us today is, frankly, because it can be. You know, we saw the government make a determination to call a snap election during a pandemic in order to gain a majority, which means that this government will be able to introduce legislation and it will pass, unless, of course, there's something fairly revolutionary occurring on the other side of the House, which I highly doubt will happen. This is a critically important amendment. There's a number of pieces in the bill that should cause everyone in this House some degree of concern. Because I think all of us, especially those of us who have put our names on a ballot, some of us more times than others. But one of the things that we rely on, British Columbians, Canadians, is the right to keep your voting preference secret. In fact, it is a critical guarantee of free expression. And it is necessary to protect voters from potential consequences voting one way or another. It seems like a pretty fundamental right to be able to make a decision and make that decision privately, personally. We know that the secret ballot was actually introduced to ensure that an individual is free from intimidation or influence. And today, the right to a secret ballot is core to the voting process. We've all experienced that. Everyone in this chamber has spent time talking to voters, knocking on doors, calling. And I can assure the members that my experience is probably no different than theirs. In many, many cases, British Columbians will tell you that how they vote is their decision. And many people are unprepared to share that information. And we accept that as part of the voting process. Apparently, though, not in this case. When we look at the secret ballot, and you've heard my colleagues list numerous places that a secret ballot is utilized. As I've mentioned, certainly provincial elections, municipal elections, provincial referendum, student council elections. I'm sure many members in this House participated in that process when they were much younger. Strata council elections. The list goes on and on. But perhaps most notably, and again, this has been referenced earlier, even the NDP party outlines the use of the secret ballot where? In their constitution, guaranteeing members of the NDP party the right to a secret ballot. The leader of the NDP, it notes, shall be elected by a secret ballot. Well, apparently it's good enough for the NDP party, but it's not for workers in British Columbia. As individuals in a democracy, we should all have the right to make our decision without influence or intimidation with the use of a secret ballot. That should be the case whether we are choosing our elected representative here in the provincial legislature or when we choose or not to join a union. But perhaps the most hypocritical thing of all is that this government has done everything possible to keep information about their work secret. Well, and how do we know that? They have earned the title of the most secret government in Canada. And certainly from my observations, it is well deserved. When transparency and data sharing is critical, and British Columbians deserve to have access to that information because essentially it belongs to them, this government does everything possible to ensure that barriers are put in place, including, as we witnessed, over a number of months and days and weeks, creating a fee to access information that we know belongs to the public. The freedom of information. And yet, when it comes to the most fundamental rights of British Columbians, to have their voter preference protected, this government is only too eager to remove those protections. The Premier and his government have made conscious decisions to keep information that belongs in the public domain secret and inaccessible. And at the same time, they refuse to protect one of the most basic principles of democracy, the secret ballot, leaving the secret ballot in place. And the irony of the situation, that the most secret government in Canada has suddenly decided that it is unacceptable for workers in British Columbia to be able to make their choice with the use of the secret ballot. So what led to the introduction of this legislation? Well, it certainly wasn't because there was extensive, exhaustive consultation and a groundswell of calls for the changes included in the bill. In fact, since the introduction of the bill, one of the most significant concerns has been the criticism about the lack of consultation with key organizations in our province. So think about that for a moment. A decision that's going to impact one of the most basic and fundamental principles of democracy, the right to make your choice with a secret ballot, and the government decides that they're simply going to do it. Why? Because they can, as a majority government. Why bother consulting? And in fact, the government didn't. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of dozens of organizations across British Columbia who have registered their concerns with this government, but once again, it has fallen on deaf ears. The criticism related to consultation has frankly become a norm for this government. There is a growing list of decisions made without meaningful consultation, and in some cases, no consultation at all. Just in the last week, we saw parents of children with autism protesting at NDP MLA offices because of a decision made without consultation that will impact services currently being provided to their children. And the NDP response is just to ignore those concerns and press on. In the case of the labor changes, zero consultation. Parents of children with autism have been pleading with this government to listen, to engage in a meaningful way. And the thing that is most disappointing about that if the change is so beneficial for families in British Columbia, what on earth is the government afraid of when it comes to actually talking to parents in a meaningful way? The same goes for the decision to remove the secret ballot. If it's so important, and if this government can demonstrate that there was a need to make that change, they should have no hesitation in actually going and talking to the people who have concerns about it. But nope, let's just move forward because we can. Add to that policy decisions related to the ALR, independent distributed learning funding, the recovery plan for mountain caribou. The list goes on. Significant decisions made without consultation and an absolutely stubborn refusal to engage in what is necessary and meaningful conversation. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about having the courage to stand up, lay out the vision, lay out the changes, and then receive the feedback. And yet, once again, no consultation. Another pattern that has emerged, which we see again in this legislation, that this government is now using as a matter of course, is the tabling of legislation that includes as little detail as possible, with the vast majority of work being left to regulation. What does that actually mean? People, British Columbians are busy trying to figure out how to feed their kids or fill up their gas tank today. So they're probably not worried about regulation and what that means for them. But what it means is that the fundamental details of how something is going to work or be implemented are done behind closed doors, out of the public domain, and certainly with no opportunity for debate in this chamber. In fact, recently we saw Bill 12 introduced in the House, and it had virtually no detail at all. Our housing critic, the member from Peace River South, described it perfectly when he said it was virtually, and I quote, a blank piece of paper, end quote. British Columbians and the democratic process deserve better than that. When a government makes commitments to British Columbians, and when it decides it's going to take significant policy action, it is incumbent on them to have the conversations with the people who it will impact. And again, I go back, for example, to the decision related to the funding model for parents of children with autism. Parents have used words that include the word traumatized. A decision that will change the lives of their families, simply done, announced, not unlike what's happening with the secret ballot, and the consequences are not up for public discussion. That's simply not good enough. The secret ballot has existed for decades in this province, and as I noted, it is in place to protect the privacy and democratic right of every worker to make their independent decision about whether they want to be represented by a union. The secret ballot remains in place in many other jurisdictions in Canada, including Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and most industries in Ontario. It's not like British Columbia is trying to modernize, update, keep up with other jurisdictions. In fact, no, taking a step backward. And I think the thing that I find interesting is that we haven't heard one single other member on the government side of this House stand up and talk about the democratic process and the loss of the secret ballot. It's a pretty fundamental right. We know, and ironically, the majority of BC workers strongly support retention of the secret ballot. Just like parents of children with autism support maintaining the model and building on it, not taking it apart. So who was demanding that the secret ballot be eliminated? Well, certainly not the expert panel that the NDP put in place to provide them with advice. In the 2018 Labour Relations Code Review Panel report, they made a recommendation about the secret ballot, and it is worthy of directly quoting their advice to this Premier and Minister. They said, and I quote, that the secret ballot vote be retained providing there are sufficient measures to ensure the exercise of employee choice is fully protected and fully remediated in the event of unlawful interference, end quote. That's exactly what the process is that we currently have in place is designed to do. And even the minister himself, when he got up to speak about this bill, could not articulate or outline the enormous surge in demand related to removing the secret ballot. He couldn't do it. This decision is being made because it can be. We all know the tortuous journey that this particular amendment has been on, because in fact, when the balance in this House was much more precarious, in fact, a minority government, guess what happened? The amendment was set aside. But here we are, back at it. Why? Because they can do the amendment and they are guaranteed that it will pass. Well, if this was the only time the government ignored the advice of their own appointed panels, that would be one thing. But just like the other patterns that have developed, that is simply not the case. We have another pattern. Appoint an expert panel, ask for advice, ignore it, and do exactly what you plan to do anyway. That's exactly what has happened, not once, but over and over again. And tragically, we don't have to look back far to find other examples. Here's one. The devastating opioid crisis in our province means that 6 people a day are dying. And yet, when provided with recommendations from death review panels in 2018 and 2022, recommendations have been, for the most part, left undone. The government appointed an MSP task force and promptly ignored the advice that they were provided. The chair of the task force noted that the government did not heed its advice, and when describing the action that the government took, said, and I quote, "This is not the direction we were going," end quote. So another pattern. Appoint an expert panel, receive the advice, ignore it, and do exactly what you planned to do in the first place. Advice provided, advice ignored. Even in the cases where the government created the very groups with a specific mandate to do what? Provide advice. That was certainly the case with the secret ballot. The government's own expert panel recommended that the government keep the secret ballot. Pretty astounding when the government handpicked their own experts for the panel and then still chose to ignore the advice it was given. So let's look at how we got here. There was no groundswell of demand for the bill. Experts said the secret ballot should be retained, and the majority of workers and British Columbians favor maintaining the secret ballot. And what did the minister and premier do? March ahead and remove the right for workers to make their actual wishes known without being pressured or intimidated. It appears that there is very little empirical evidence to support the minister's assertions that the card check system is needed. It seems to me that all of us, every single member in this legislature, should be concerned about the loss of employee rights in this province after the arbitrary decision to move ahead with this legislation. The second issue that has been raised is specific to the construction industry. Now, unions will be able to raid unionized construction employers every year during a defined open period. And in this case, those months are the months of July and August. And of course, most people, or many people, would know that raiding is, of course, a process by which one union replaces another one at a workplace. Prior to this change, such raids were allowed once every three years, depending upon the length of the collective agreement. This time period was consistent with the expert panel's recommendations because of the disruption that a raid can have on any workplace. So here we go again. Once again, we're moving from a process that was supported by an expert panel to a raid period that seems to have little evidence of the need to make this change, other than the government wants to support trade unions who want increased opportunities to raid other unions who may seem to be more employer-friendly. One of the most difficult conversations to listen to in this chamber was the implication that members on this side of the House don't care about worker safety, don't care about all kinds of things. And from my perspective, that does an enormous disservice to this place and to the people who actually are sent here. So I can assure you that there are people in every seat in this chamber who respect the right of workers to make a decision about whether or not they want to be a part of a union. And that's an important principle. So here we go. Moving from a process, again, supported by an expert panel to a raid period that seems to have little evidence. Think about the reason that the panel supported the raid period at once every 3 years. To avoid disruption. I'm not sure how many people in the chamber take a moment to think about the fact the construction window where some of us live is extremely short. It is compressed. It is complicated enough to get projects completed. And now what do we introduce? Uncertainty, additional cost. For what reason? Because the government can do it. While there seems to be little evidence that this change is necessary, we can certainly expect that construction employers should be prepared for this change to potentially impact existing projects this summer. These are the busiest months for construction, and it isn't hard to imagine that there is the potential for labor strife during the most critical season for projects in our province. And Mr. Speaker, what that will mean is the potential for increased cost and delay. At a time when now more than ever, we need to expedite investments in housing and infrastructure projects right across this province, we have the introduction of significant labor changes that have the potential to create instability and disruption. How on earth does that make sense? No clamor, no enormous demand to make these changes, expert panels that say you shouldn't do that, and the government stubbornly presses on. Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendments will have significant impacts on British Columbians and on employers. The continued pattern of lack of meaningful consultation with the business community, once again ignoring the advice of their own hand-picked expert panel. Mr. Speaker, when we think about the people who spoke up to say how concerned they were about this, 23 organizations wrote an open letter to the Premier. And I know that it's easy in this legislature to dismiss the words of opposition as, well, that's their job, they can say what they will. These are not the voices of opposition members. The open letter is written directly to the Premier of British Columbia. And it begins by saying, on behalf of 23 organizations and our collective membership, we write to express our dismay with changes your government has proposed to the certification provisions of the Labour Relations Code. This is something all of us should be concerned about, and I quote, "These changes will have economic repercussions across the province as businesses work to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. They will also needlessly destabilize the labour relations balance in British Columbia." The key word, Mr. Speaker, needlessly. There was no pressing demand. There was no groundswell calling on the government to make these changes. And Mr. Speaker, we've seen this in a number of areas, but let me just conclude my remarks by referencing Bill 10 and again, continuing with the remarks that were provided in the open letter. Ministers in this legislature have mandate letters. And I know about that, having been a minister for a significant part of my career. The minister's mandate letter related to this bill says, and I quote, by the way, Mr. Speaker, the mandate letter directs a minister in terms of what they should be doing. The mandate letter for the Minister of Labour says, and I quote, "Engage employer and worker representatives in consideration of any changes proposed to workplace legislation to ensure the widest possible support." End quote. That wasn't a passing reference. It was an expectation of the Minister of Labour. And it says, let me remind the members opposite, that they need to have meaningful conversation, engage with employer and worker representatives. Why? To ensure the widest possible support. Well, Mr. Speaker, the letter goes on to speak about the other additional concerns. But for me, the summary that speaks most clearly about the patterns that have emerged with the government relate to consultation, sharing of data, transparency, creating legislation that amount to being a blank piece of paper, making sure that regulation is the majority of how business is conducted. Let me quote the letter again, Mr. Speaker. Regrettably, this is not the first time that members of the business community have expressed frustration about how consultations are conducted on employment legislation. It is now a pattern that is extremely concerning, especially given your instructions in the minister's mandate letter to consult widely in advance of making changes to workplace legislation. The secret ballot is a fundamental component of a democratic system. It is a standard that should apply in all of our workplaces, just as it does in other facets of public life. Mr. Speaker, we have expressed over and over in this House, in this chamber, our concerns about not only the content of Bill 10, but equally as importantly, the process and how the government got to this place in Bill 10. There was no groundswell of support for this change. The government created its own expert panel and said, give us advice. The government received the advice and promptly decided to ignore it. There has been a lack of meaningful consultation. And again, when you have a majority government, you still have a responsibility to have meaningful dialogue about policy changes that will impact the lives of British Columbians. And so, Mr. Speaker, for the reasons that I've noted today and those that my colleagues have articulately laid out, we call on this government to think about not just Bill 10, but the processes that continue to emerge. Lack of consultation, lack of transparency, lack of detailed information when legislation is being brought forward. It's not just this bill. It's over and over and over again. And Mr. Speaker, I will conclude with just this remark. The fact that not only do ministers' mandate letters, and in this case specifically the Minister of Labour, say that you must go and talk to people about these changes so that you can garner the widest support possible. The Premier also said to every single cabinet minister in his cabinet that they have a responsibility to listen and to take good ideas wherever they come from. And in my view, Mr. Speaker, that includes in this legislature, from other legislators who have been elected and sent here by the people of British Columbia to have their voices heard. So, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you, we will not be supporting this piece of legislation, and we urge the Minister of Labour to go back, take a look at his mandate letter, and perhaps ask himself whether or not this bill should be given reconsideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise to join my colleagues in the official opposition to speak against Bill 10. As the Leader of the official opposition has just reminded this House how we got to this place, with Bill 10 coming forward, despite the fact that it was not so long ago when we had the third party holding the balance of power supporting this government when they brought forward Bill 30. It was a time where Bill 30 was being considered, and of course there was concerns and discussions around the secret ballot review. And that is something that when the minister asked for recommendations for amendments to the Labour Relations Code, as submitted by the expert panel with Michael Fleming, Sandra Bannister, QC, and Barry Dong, as submitted on August 31st, 2018. There was consideration. And I would say that having participated in the Bill 30 debate, certainly I had understood by the former member, the leader of the third party, his and the third party's caucus understanding of the importance of maintaining the secret ballot. We've heard many in this House speak to how the secret ballot has existed for 30 of the last 38 years in this province. By definition, Mr. Speaker, the secret ballot helps to protect the privacy, the independence, and the democratic right of every worker to vote either for or against union representation without coercion, intimidation, or harassment. The secret ballot is the norm in most of our country, including in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and most industries in Ontario, and has been noted by others in this House, the secret ballot is also strongly favored by the majority of BC workers. A recent poll has showed that 79% of British Columbians oppose doing away with the secret ballot, and only 9% support card checks. So in the face of this, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the report itself, which the Minister of Labour had asked for, and that had underpinned most of the amendments that are brought forward in Bill 30, there was an acknowledgement in the report that there are concerns regarding the potential for misinformation, peer pressure, or even coercion that may arise in a card check system. That the secret ballot is the best indication of employee choice and enables employees to change their minds in the anonymity of a voting booth. This was noted in the report by the experts that this government and this minister retained. You would have thought, Mr. Speaker, particularly as British Columbia continues to recover and focus on the recovery from the pandemic, the focus of the members of this Legislative Assembly needs to be on labour stability and balance, and not the kind of divisiveness that Bill 10 will bring. When you look at the protections of the rights of workers to choose union representation under the Labour Relations Code and the Charter of Rights, workers in this province clearly have that right to choose union representation under the current code, that right under our Charter of Rights and freedoms here in Canada. But it was the mandate of the Labour Relations Board as well that is in place. It is an independent tribunal whose mandate is to ensure the fairness in the certification process. That's the reason why it's understandable that when the 2018 Labour Relations Code Review Panel came to the recommendation number 5, they recommended that the secret ballot vote be retained, providing there are sufficient measures to ensure the exercise of employee choice is fully protected and fully remediated in the event of unlawful interference. I know that the Minister of Labour, in introducing this bill on second reading, in terms of his further comments after first reading, he talked about the concerns around worker safety. And I know that other members in this House certainly share that concern, like the member from Kootenay East. He talked about the tragic history of mine workers and safety on the work site in the history of this province. We know that if this minister is particularly concerned about ensuring worker safety, he should be looking at other legislation, including the Workers' Compensation Act. And we've heard other members with the official opposition talk about the slowness of this government to deal with exposure to asbestos and worker safety in that regard. That's where the focus should be. It's not the secret ballot. Mr. Speaker, there are other mechanisms legislatively that this government should be focused on if they have further concerns about that. And we all share the importance of our workers being safe. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, there certainly are other rights and protections against employer interference in the certification process. Mr. Speaker, that's what's called an unfair labor practice. It's set out in the code. There are protections where an employer is seen as threatening workers or changing terms and conditions. The board can go so far as automatically certifying regardless of the actual vote. This is a protection of the workers' rights. the Minister of Labour talked at length about his concerns about employer interference. The member from Langley talked about the same. They seem to disregard the existing protections that are already under the Labour Relations Code. Furthermore, interference, if it happens before the cards are even submitted for counting, and what the code can do, once again, currently protects all interference, whether before or after the application is made. I know that there's been some consideration, and certainly that was a topic of review by the review panel in 2018 in the recommendations, to look at increasing the length of time for which a union certification card would be valid from 3 months to 6 months. That was done under Bill 30. What was also done under Bill 30, Mr. Speaker, is the extension of the time, or the reduction of the time, from 10 days to 5 days in terms of between the time of application and the time of the vote. That was intended to lessen the opportunity and the time period for any consideration of employer involvement or any concerns around employer intervention or interference. It was on these bases that presumably the panel was considering why a secret ballot vote should be retained. Again, that panel, and I do recognize the debate that has been going on in this House, as noted by members of the third party. There is this pendulum swing back and forth, as they called it. But we're talking about 30 years out of the last 38 years. I appreciate that we continue to ensure and want to have stability and balance between the employer and the employee relationship in our province, union or non-union workplaces. But that's the reason why I think you rely on an expert panel. This government is not doing that. This government is ignoring that recommendation, as much as the Minister of Labour will say otherwise. He has not demonstrated and he's not shown any evidence since Bill 30 was adopted by that minority government supported by the third party in this House, extending the time period from 3 months to 6 months for the length of time for which union certification cards would be valid, and reducing the time period from 10 days to 5 days between the time of application and the vote. Those are two important measures. Measures I would expect that the panel is referring to when they made the recommendation to keep the secret ballot. Where is the evidence, Mr. Speaker? This government has failed to provide the evidence. I know that members on this side of the House will hopefully take and have the opportunity to question the minister about something as simple as this. Since the passing of Bill 30, with those amendments that I mentioned, what are the instances of interference which have occurred? What are the concerns? This amendment won't change that. We have the protections under the Labour Relations Code. And certainly, we know now that in the process, the reason why we have the opportunity to have a secret ballot, it gives workers and employees the opportunity to consider their own decision. We know that in our democratic process here in our province and in this country, throughout many organizations, including the political party for which the government represents, there are secret ballot votes. The importance of ensuring that individuals have that right. Now, this government doesn't seem to have any hesitation to step on people's rights. We saw that with the way they stripped away the rights of injured British Columbians. We saw that with the Attorney General when he expanded the minor injury definition to include brain injury and concussion by way of regulation, even though the Attorney General said he wouldn't do that. We know there are concerns, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the types of legislation that come through the House, including the bill that dealt with FOI fees. The blatant disregard by this government for presenting legislation that is done strictly for political reasons. And, Mr. Speaker, noting the hour, with that, I would like to reserve my place and move adjournment of the debate.
Member, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Government House Leader. Oh, sorry, Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supplies, Section A reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Education and Childcare and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
Next sitting, Honourable
So ordered. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We'll see everybody back at 1 o'clock for more debate from the member, and I move that the House do now adjourn.
Member, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. today.